We Tech Alliance, I'm Arms Bumanlag. Technology is trending on all fronts in 2023. The leap to artificial intelligence is making headlines, big data is getting bigger, and VR is moving to new industries at a feverish pace. But it all comes down to allowing people to grow, thrive, and innovate collaboratively. Geoff Perfect has a successful career in tech built around launching and selling transformational platforms, solutions, and devices from BlackBerry to Apple. I talked with Geoff about authentic leadership skills in building and managing high-performing teams and what that means for Windsor-Essex.
I've been really lucky to have a couple of really great mentors, Silicon Valley mentors in my career, ones that took real personal attention or paid personal attention to making sure my career was successful, at least in their eyes, invested above and beyond just that classic employee-employer type relationship. They guided me through difficult times, gave personal advice, gave great business advice, and were just there available at any time. And it was really amazing, right? I think in many ways, my goal at this stage in my career is to try and emulate what they offered me to other companies that I'm advising now.
And it's interesting you should say that too, because I think certainly from an industry's perspective, many industries, at least some of the ones that I've been involved in it. So it's some of the stuff that I've learned from a broadcasting lens, I never really considered when I was coming fresh out of school. I kind of latched on to somebody who was quote unquote in the trenches. And they give you that kind of perspective to kind of see how things are going. And I'd assume, Geoff, this is something that very much in the tech sector and from an entrepreneurship lens, it's sort of like trial by fire, right? Like you have these people who have done it that you may not even be aware of doing it in that particular way, but they're there as an invaluable resource to you when you're first starting out.
Yeah, wisdom's just basically pattern recognition at some level. And so when you're working with a mentor, the hope is that they've recognized the pattern before you can and share it with you. And I think, I was obviously the mentors that I was working with were much more seasoned than I was. And so they had that pattern recognition, and specifically they had it in the element of the tech world. Both of them were born, bred kind of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, successful startup CEOs, or senior executives in Silicon Valley in the startup world. And then ultimately, even in one of them was in Apple, and so did the startup thing, ended up at Apple. So really had interesting pattern recognition, both in the startup world and then perhaps in the largest company in the world, pattern recognition too. So,
through your career and the things that you've done, Geoff, and I think it's something that it's worth noting, because I think quite often people may see failure as a roadblock. They may see it as sort of 5 steps backwards, but you're saying, when it comes to the experience of failure, wear it as a badge of honor, which I think is a very interesting way and a great way to sort of reframe learning by doing, right?
Yeah. I know I've been gone from Canada for a long time, but I would say that historically, my personal experience was failure was frowned upon when I grew up in Canada. We weren't great risk takers. Part of the reason that I was drawn to Silicon Valley was because it was fundamentally the gold rush of my age. And I wanted that risk. I wanted that rush, as it were, to experience it. And so failure only can come with taking risk, right? It's just that simple. And so if you're willing to take the risk, you also have to be willing to fail, and then not let it be a hurdle for you. I think, to your point, right? You get to learn from it. And those most successful have all failed, and they learn from that. And perhaps even more importantly, they're open, transparent, and authentic about their failures. There's nothing in Silicon Valley. There's nothing wrong with failure. Maybe multiple failures over time without any success,
Sure.
but that just means you weren't learning, right? And I worked in many companies where a failure wasn't the end of your career. It was more like, well, what did you learn and how do we make it better? Right. So
I like that. It's sort of that sort of quote unquote post-mortem of an idea that maybe may not stick to the wall, where I think and correct me if I'm wrong, Geoff, but you'll see that in a lot of progressive companies where they let their employees empower them to really take chances, take risks, calculated risks, and then learn.
Yeah.
And by doing that, I think that helps people feel that they're valued, and you learn by doing, and you learn by trying.
Yeah.
So I think that's really empowering for a lot of folks, and I think you speak to that too, right? I mean, that must allow people to have some of the best ideas born out of that failure.
Totally, right? I mean, the whole idea of like sort of a corporate dissonance is where the best ideas come from. If we all sit around a table and just say, "Oh, that's great, sounds good, let's do that," and we don't have any friction, the results are not going to be great. I mean, that's absolutely true. I really like the idea of sort of corporate friction, obviously done with a degree of professionalism, but
Mhm.
that idea that together, if we sort of proverbially butt heads, but do it in a way that's going to deliver better results, that can't be a bad thing. The other thing I've been thinking a little bit about too, right, is this idea that, when you think about risk, as I had said earlier, you have to take it, but it's not unmitigated risk, right? Good risk comes with thoughtful upfront planning and a lot of KPIs or measurements sort of embedded into that risk. Nothing's ever going to go the way you planned up front. I get that. And I certainly have seen that and lived it many times. But at least that planning gives you a bit of a roadmap to start. And again, it gives you some guardrails so that it's not just, silly risk. Nobody wants to have silly risk in business, but you do want to have that risk that is guardrailed with some thoughtfulness up front.
Talk to me about functional expertise, and I guess maybe not being the jack of all trades.
Yeah, this is something that I learned probably most at Apple. When I was recruited out of BlackBerry to move over to Apple, I remember sitting down early days in my interviews, my interview cycle, which almost lasted a year, and had over 9 different interviews over the course of that year. One of the things they really pounded into me, and I don't think I understood it as well until I got to Apple, was the idea that for a company to be great, really, really great, and I think we can all agree that Apple is that. They really have to do a few things, very few things, exceptionally well. And the example that they gave me during that interview process was we're sitting in a boardroom or in a meeting room, and there was a table maybe 7-8 feet long, maybe 2 or 3 feet wide. And I remember, I think it was Tim Cook actually who said, we can put all of our products on this table, and we're a multi-billion-dollar company, and we can put everything that we manufacture on this 7-foot by 8-foot table. Now, maybe he was stretching a little bit, but basically that was the essence of it, that we do a few things extremely well. And then that was reinforced by me when I remember we were introducing a new feature on the iPhone, specifically around some capability in the camera on the iPhone and a particular type of lens that needed to be designed. And we hired the best, most proficient lens guy in the world to help us build that particular lens for the iPhone, because he functionally was the best possible person in the world that we could hire. And so it makes you feel good if you're working as an employee there, because you're like, wow, I passed that high bar. But equally, you feel a little inferior sometimes. But you realize that the reason that Apple got to where they got, and great companies, and you could probably broaden that beyond Apple, great companies get to where they get is because they say, we're going to do a few things. We're going to do it very well. And we're going to get the best people in the world to do it. And I don't care where they come from, their color, their creed, does not matter. Right. And I think that's a really important point in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley doesn't care about an old boys network at some level. Of course it exists, don't get me wrong, but they truly believe in functional greatness and will seek out anywhere in the world. And obviously it's an attractive place to be, people to come there. And again, they're blind to anything else other than your functional capability. And I think that's a really interesting thing that we could all learn, because I don't see that everywhere. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Geoff. I don't think that's like 90% of places aren't at that point, right? And I think it's kudos to, Silicon Valley for having that sort of foresight to say, okay, let's bring in people who know what they are and can do what they do and do it well. Tell me about the power of the ecosystem.
I think again that the other thing that I've learned over my career is just how important. And when I think about Windsor, right, and I think about tech in Windsor, I think about Silicon Valley sort of as a comparison. I think about all of the pieces that need to go together in order to make a successful ecosystem work. I think probably I first started to feel that ecosystem power when I was at BlackBerry, and you saw how BlackBerry became that tent pole for technology in Waterloo, and around it build an ecosystem. And it's not just an ecosystem of more tech, it's lawyers, it's capital, it's the university, it's all of the elements that go to build an amazing ecosystem that supports and feeds that technology or that particular bent of technology. And so, in Silicon Valley, everybody is somehow, some way woven into that ecosystem, be it from, one of my college roommates was a lawyer at University of Western Ontario with me. Now he's a lawyer in Sand Hill Road, which is the famous sort of Silicon Valley road, and it works alongside the best and brightest startups. That then you bring in all of the capital, the VCs that all have shown up there. You think about Stanford down the road. All of those pieces fit together, and it's amazing to watch them in action. And it's not a linear sort of improvement. It's algorithmic, because having all of those pieces and building them together make it just that much easier to do business there. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, we can go and look at the data, right? New York, Boston, Los Angeles, all of them very rich startup scenes. And yet, if you look at those, they all start to have key and core ingredients that build that ecosystem that allow that tech environment to flourish. And so, I mean, as I think about Windsor, I think about how does that ecosystem start to flourish around the ingredients that have really been necessary to make it work in Silicon Valley and elsewhere.
Tech Talk continues. From business acceleration, building and engaging the tech community, and championing tech and innovation. Follow WeTech Alliance on social media or visit them on the web.